Hello everyone and welcome to this video on this course of Getting Started with Angular. In this part of the video, we will be going over in detail of event binding. We already covered event binding briefly in the previous video, but in this part of the video, I'll be going over it in detail, and we will be passing data from an HTML file to our TypeScript file and updating variables over there. So without getting into too much theory and technical jargon, I will start with an example right away. So I already have my application running and I have my application set up like this. After 2 seconds, the add customer button comes back in, all of this which we covered previously. So what I'll do is I'll go to my customer.component.html, customers.component.html actually, and I will try to add an input field over here. So I will add a BR tag over here, and I will do input type is equal to text. And then I will bind to the input event. So in the previous video, we binded to the click event for the button over here, but now we are trying to bind to the input event, and the input event will fire up and detect any keystroke which happens. So basically, if I type in anything, if I press any key on my keyboard, this input event will pick it up. And what I will tell this input event is that every input event has to be sent to this update customer function. And we will pass $event, and $event signifies the data which we're sending from the HTML file to the TypeScript file. It will contain details of the keystrokes which we have entered. So I will take my update customer, and it fails because I don't have the update customer function created. I'll go to my customer.component.ts and I will define an update customer function. And what I'll do is I will console.log my event. I save, I go back to my application, and I have my input field over here. So every time I enter, my input event is coming up. Now, what I would like to see is the text which I'm entering. I would like to see it in the console. So for that, all I have to do is input.target.value. And this only signifies, like, if you guys will see in a moment what I mean over here. So if I, as you can see, every text or any text I'm typing, it's coming over here. If I type in my name, anything, so basically whatever I'm typing, it's coming over here. So yeah, we have successfully passed data from our HTML file to our TypeScript file. Now I would like to reflect this data in real time in my browser. Now how I can do that is I have this text over here, customer added successfully, which occurs through string interpolation when I click on my button, a combination of string interpolation and property binding, all which we covered in the previous video. So I click on save, and what I'll do is I will tell my Angular application that this new customer is the variable name, equated to the event.target.value. I click on save, I go back to my application, and if I type, so whatever I'm typing, it is coming on the browser. So this was a very basic level example of event binding. We are passing data from our HTML file. Whatever we are typing, it's being sent to the TypeScript file, and when the TypeScript file updates that particular value, then that value gets updated in the browser. So that, like, this is very basic level event binding. What I would like to do is I would like to go over something a bit more complicated. I will define an input tag over here. Input type is equal to text, and what I'll do is I will bind to my directive, which is ng model, and we covered ng model in the previous video. And I will bind it to my new customer variable. I click on save, and I have to make sure that in the app module TS forms module has been imported, and it is. So what I've done is I've defined two input fields. One simply takes an input field, updates the variable in the TS file, which gets reflected in the HTML file. And the other one is relying on ng model. So let's see what the difference is. And just to be clear, I will say h1 tag ng model below. Click on save. So I have two input fields over here. One is the simple one. Yeah, I click on add customer. That new customer variable has been turned into an empty string. If I type my name, so as you guys can see, whenever I type in my name, it's being reflected over here, but it's also being reflected in the input field of the ng model. The reason is that ng model has been that this directive binds to the new customer variable. So whenever I type something in the input field, this update customer event function gets called. Inside of the update customer, this dot new customer gets assigned the value which I entered in the input field, and this dot new customer is being used two places. It's being used over here in new customer through string interpolation, and it's also being reflected over here through ng model, which is a perfect example of two-way data binding. So if I were to type something over here in the ng model directive directly, even though my changes are being reflected over here, they're not being reflected in the input field over here, because the thing is that this is one-way data binding. It does update my customer.com, the new customer variable inside of my TypeScript file, but the value itself or the value inside of it doesn't get updated, because it does send out the data, but it doesn't receive back the data anywhere, because we have no mechanism for that. Whereas ng model, whenever you type something in ng model, whenever you type something over here in input, the input field, whenever this new customer variable gets updated, whenever you type something in the input field over here, this value gets updated, but this value also in turn updates the ng model value over here, which is a perfect example of two-way data binding. I would say you guys, I mean, this was a bit of complex concept to explain, but I guess the best way to say it is that ng model is an example of two-way data binding, where anything that gets updated in the TypeScript file is reflected on the HTML file, and the HTML file update then affects the TypeScript file as well. Whereas the input over here, which updates the variable alone, but it itself does not get updated. This is an example of one-way data binding. So yeah, but in short, as far as getting the hang of one-way data binding, getting the hang of understanding the difference between one-way data binding and two-way data binding goes, I would say it's better to not get too much into the technical jargon and the theory, and it's much better to understand the use case of the ng model directive and the input event. How do we bind to the input event? Where do we use that, and where do we use the ng model directive? And obviously, as you progress into the course, you guys will get an understanding of where to use which method. That I personally believe is much better than understanding the theoretical difference between the two. So yeah, this was a very short and brief introduction to event binding. We covered basic level event binding in the previous video, but in this video we actually got to see it in action. In the next video, I will be starting discussing and starting my lecture on directives. I hope you guys find this content useful. Till we meet in the next video, this is Mohit Lodhi signing off.